Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to learn about another way of placing elements onto our window. So in the previous lecture we have already created two frames and we have placed one frame at the top and other frame at the bottom, and we had some buttons onto those frames. So that was one way of designing your layout, but one other way of designing your layout is by arranging the items or arranging the widgets onto your window in a grid format. So if you talk about a grid is actually number of rows and columns together, and you could actually place your elements depending upon the row number and the column numbers. So that is what a grid is all about. So for this lecture we will create two labels and two text fields. So basically we will design a basic form in which the user has to enter his first name and last name. So we will have two labels and two text fields and a single button which will be placed on our window. So let's go ahead and learn how to do that. So simply go right here, and the first thing which we do is that we create label. So we type in label1 equals label, and to this obviously we are going to pass in the root object, and let's say the text is going to be equal to, let's say, first name. So let's say this label says enter first name, and we are going to copy this label exactly and name it as label2, have it passed to the root, and instead of the first name we will have something like last name over here. So once you have these two things in place, that means the first part is done, that is creating the label is done. Now you need something to actually accept the input from the user. So for that we are going to need text fields, but text fields in Tkinter are actually called as entries. So we type in entry 1 equals, and here we type in entry, so that is for accepting the input, and to this we also pass in the root as we have done for the labels. And also type in entry 2 equals entry over here, and also pass in root to this as well. And one more thing which you need to take care of is that you should have spaces after commas in Python, or else you are going to get a warning. So make sure that you have those spaces, not over here, and also have proper spaces over here. Alright, so once you have these labels and these entries to accept the input from the user, the next thing which you need to do is that you actually need to go ahead and arrange these items into the grid format. So in order to add these items into the grid format, we go right below here, and the first thing which we do is that we add label. So we type label1 dot grid. So this grid is actually going to help us arrange items in a format. So whenever you pass in or whenever you arrange items in a grid, you need to specify the row values and column values for it. So the first row is going to be row 0. So we type row equals 0 and give a comma and type in column equals 0. That means the row value will be 0 and the column value would be 0. So once you specify this for the label 1, now the label 2 is going to be exactly below it. So we type in label2 dot grid, and here, as this is going to be below it, the row value for this is going to be equal to 1, and the column value for this is going to be equal to same, which is 0, because it is in the same column, but we are changing the row so that these two labels are placed one below the other. Now once you have this label, you actually need to have these entry values right in front of these two labels respectively. So we type in entry1 dot grid, and here you need to pass in the row value for the first one as 0 because it is going to be in the first row, but the column value for this would be equal to 1 because it is going to be placed in the next column. And as far as the entry 2 is concerned, the row value is going to be equal to 1 and the column value is going to be equal to 1 as well. And the reason for that is that if you take a look at grid, so let me just open up my paint here and I will explain you how this thing actually works. So let me just minimize it right over here, and if you actually go ahead and if you take a pencil, so this thing right here is our grid. So sorry for my bad drawing, but I just wanted to explain you a few things. So let's assume that this is our grid. So these are the values for column. So this is 0th column, 1st column and 2nd column, and this is going to be the 0th row, 1st row and the 2nd row. So if you talk about the first label, that is going to be placed in row 0 and column 0. So this is going to be L1, and for L2 that is going to be row 1 and column 0. So L2 would be placed right over here. If you talk about entry 1, now entry 1 has to accept the first name, so that is going to be placed in row 0 and column 1. So this is row 0 and this is column 1, so the entry 1 would be placed here. And if we talk about entry 2, that is row 1 and column 1, so this is row 1 and column 1, so entry 2 would be placed right over here. So once you understand this, let's go ahead and save the code and see if this thing actually works. So I will quickly save the code and run it. So as you could see, we have our window right here. So this is the first name, and we actually have the text field so that we could enter our text. We also have last name and the field to enter our last name right over here. So that's how you could use the grid layout to basically place items in a form of a grid. So in a grid, you will have rows and column values, and you need to make sure that you place the widgets in the form of rows and columns in case of a grid layout. So that's it for this lecture, and I hope you guys understood how to actually place widgets using a grid layout. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.